The Tale of Thorvald, the Far Traveler. Chapter 1. A man was named Eilifur Orn. One of the highest mountains on Reykjastran in Skagafjordur is named after him. Eilifur Orn was the son of Atli Skidasson the Old, son of Jarl Bardr. Eilifur Orn married Thorlaug, daughter of Samundur the South Icelander, who had settled Samundarlid. They had 3 sons. One was named Solmundur, who was the father of Gudmundur, who in turn was the father of Vikabardi and his brothers. Another was Atli the Strong. He married Herdis, daughter of Thordur of Hofti. Their daughter was Thorlaug, who married the powerful Gudmundur of Modrvellir. The third son of Eilifur Orn was named Kodran, who lived at Gilja in Vatnsdal. He was a wealthy man. His wife was named Jargurdur. They had 2 sons, Ormur and Thorvaldur. Kodran loved his son Ormur very much, but Thorvaldur little or not at all. Thorvaldur was put to labor as soon as he was able. He was poorly clothed and in all things made a servant of his brother. He served in his father's household, doing what he was ordered with good will. Chapter 2. At that time, a prophetess named Thordis lived on Skagastrand, where the place is now called Spakanufell. One summer she came as a guest to Kodran at Gilja, for they were friends. While at the feast, Thordis noticed the great difference in how the brothers were treated. She said to Kodran, "I advise you to show more honor to your son Thorvaldur than you have before. For I see truly that for many reasons he will become more distinguished than all your kin. If you cannot love him now, then at least give him a payment and release him if someone will care for him while he is still young." Kodran saw that she spoke this out of goodwill and agreed to give some silver. He brought forth a pouch of silver. Thordis looked at the silver and said, "This he shall not have, for this silver you have taken by force and oppression as a fine from innocent men." Kodran brought forth another pouch. She examined it and said, "Nor will I accept this silver on his behalf." Kodran asked, "What fault do you find with this silver?" She replied, "This wealth was gathered out of greed, from rents and tributes beyond what is just. Such money does not belong to a man who is to be both righteous and merciful." Finally, Kodran showed her a third bag of silver, full and heavy. Thordis weighed out 3 marks from it and gave the rest back. Kodran asked, "Why did you choose this silver rather than the others I gave you?" She said, "Because this was rightly inherited from your father." Thordis then departed to the feast with honorable gifts and Kodran's friendship. She took Thorvaldur with her to Spakanufell. He was well cared for, clothed, and provided with all he needed, and he matured greatly. When he had come of age, he left Iceland on the advice of Thordis. He did not stop until he reached Denmark. There he met Svein, called Forkbeard. Svein was of low birth on his mother's side, though he claimed to be the son of King Haraldur Gormson of Denmark. At that time, Haraldur would not acknowledge Svein as his son, and so Svein remained mostly at war. As was the custom among Vikings, he was called king by his men. When Thorvaldur came to Svein, the king welcomed him and made him his man. Thorvaldur stayed with him for several summers, raiding westward over the sea. Chapter 3. Not long after Thorvaldur had been with Svein, the king esteemed him more than all other men and companions. Thorvaldur was a man of great wisdom and evident virtue, strong in body and courageous in heart, skilled in battle and bold in fight, generous and mild, faithful and humble in service. He was beloved by all his comrades. Even though he was still a heathen, he practiced justice more than any other heathen man. All the spoils he gained in war he gave to the needy or used to ransom captives. He sent ransomed men back to their families. For his courage in battle, it was made law that he should have first choice of the spoils. But he always chose the things of least value to his comrades and greatest grief to the losers, and returned them. Even those who were plundered by Svein's men loved Thorvaldur and praised his goodness. For this reason, his own men were often freed when captured, even more so than Svein himself. One time, when Sven raided Britain, he initially won a great victory, but as he pressed inland, a great cavalry force came upon him. Sven was captured, bound, and thrown into prison, along with Thorvaldur and many other noble men. The next day, a powerful duke came to the dungeon with many men to release Thorvaldur. Not long before, Thorvaldur had ransomed the duke's son and sent him home. The duke invited Thorvaldur to come out free. Thorvaldur swore that he would not leave alive unless King Svein and all his men were also freed. The duke did so out of gratitude. Svein later recalled this at a feast with 2 other kings. When a servant marveled that 3 kings ate from one dish, Sven said with a smile, "I know a foreign farmer's son who, if worth were rightly judged, would be no less noble or honorable than any of us 3 kings." The hall erupted in laughter, and all asked who this man could be. Sven replied, "The man I speak of is as wise as any king ought to be, brave and strong like the fiercest berserker, and as gentle and well-mannered as the best philosopher." And so he told them the story of Thorvald, who had saved him through friendship and many noble deeds. Chapter 4. The Mission to Iceland and the Battle of the Berserks. After these things, Thorvald accepted holy baptism from a Saxon bishop named Friedrich. Soon after, Thorvald entreated the bishop earnestly to come with him to Iceland to preach the gospel, and to turn his father, mother, and kinfolk to God. Bishop Friedrich gladly agreed, and they set out for Iceland. Their journey went well. Kodransson received his son Thorvald warmly. That winter, Thorvald and the bishop stayed at Gilja with Kodransson, with a household of 13 men. Since Bishop Friedrich did not speak the local tongue, Thorvald preached the word of God himself to his kin and all who came. Some men were converted that winter by his words. Now we must tell how Thorvald led his own father to the true faith. On a feast day, Bishop Friedrich and his clergy held divine service. Kodransson stood nearby, more out of curiosity than conviction. He heard the sound of the bells, smelled the sweet incense, and saw the bishop robed gloriously and the clergy in white garments, the church lit with wax candles. Kodransson said to Thorvald afterward, "I have seen and considered how devoutly you serve your God, but your customs seem quite unlike ours. It seems your God delights in light, while our gods fear it. If this is so, your bishop is a prophet, for I know you learn all from him. But I too have a prophet who benefits me greatly. He warns me of future things, guards my cattle, and guides me in my affairs. I trust him dearly and have long worshipped him, but he hates your ways and warns me not to favor you." Thorvald asked, "Where does your prophet dwell?" Kodransson replied, "In a great stone, not far from my farm." Thorvald said, "Then let us make a test. Your prophet, you say, is powerful, but my bishop, though weak, has the might of the God of heaven. If his blessing can drive your prophet from his stronghold, then you must forsake him and serve the Almighty, who dwells in eternal light." Kodransson agreed. "Let us see which is true." Bishop Friedrich then blessed water, sang psalms, and sprinkled the stone and its surroundings. That night, Kodransson dreamed. His spirit prophet came to him sorrowfully, saying, "You have done ill, inviting those who betray you. They poured burning water over my home, and though it harms me little, my children suffer from the fiery drops." The next morning, Kodransson told his son. Thorvald rejoiced and urged the bishop to persist. On the second day, the bishop repeated the rite. That night, the spirit appeared again, dark, rough-skinned, wearing a hideous cloak and trembling with rage. "These men are robbing us of all good. Drive them away, or we must lose everything." Again, Kodransson reported this. A third time the bishop came, prayed fervently, and sprinkled the stone. That night the spirit came weeping. "The bishop has destroyed my home, burned my garments, and driven me into exile. We must part forever because of your betrayal." Kodransson said, "I worshipped you out of ignorance. Now I know you are deceitful and weak. I will forsake you and seek the shelter of the Almighty God." Then he was baptized, along with his wife Jarngirdur and all the household, except Ormur, who still refused. Chapter 5. The Burning of the Berserks and the Spread of the Gospel. The next spring, Bishop Friedrich and Thorvald traveled west to Vididar and settled at Reykjavik. There they lived for 4 winters, going about Iceland preaching the word of God. In the early days there, Thorvald sought the hand of a woman named Vigdis, daughter of Olafur of Haukagil. When the bishop and Thorvald came to the wedding feast, many heathens were present. The hall was large, with a stream flowing through it. Christians and heathens would not sit together, so a tent cloth was hung across the stream to divide them. Among the guests were 2 powerful berserks, both named Haukar. They hated the Christian faith and challenged the bishop to prove its truth by fire. They demanded he walk barefoot through flames, or be struck with weapons without harm. Bishop Friedrich, trusting in God, did not refuse. Great fires were lit. Clothed in full episcopal vestments, he blessed the fire, sprinkled holy water, and walked through the flames unscathed. The fire parted before him like wind. His vestments were untouched. Then the berserks rushed into the fire, howling and biting their shields. But they stumbled, fell into the flames, and were burned to death in moments. They were buried up the ravine, and the place is still called Haukagil. This miracle moved many to faith. One honest man, Glummer Thorkelson, told it to Gunnlaugur, the monk, who recorded it. Olafur of Haukagil later built a church at his farm, using timber provided by Thorvaldur. Chapter 6. Persecutions and the Challenge at the Althingi. Thorvaldur and Bishop Friedrich labored unceasingly to bring souls to Christ. They journeyed widely across Iceland, even reaching Vamur in the Dales during Althingi. There, Thorvaldur preached. The lady of the house, Friedgerdur, at first received them kindly, but while Thorvaldur preached, she muttered pagan blessings and soon turned hostile. Her son, Skeggi, mocked Thorvaldur's words. Thorvaldur composed this verse in response. I brought forth holy law, no man listened. The lady of fruit cursed me. Then God gripped the idol wife. She howled from the pagan altar. No one in the Westfjords was converted. But in the north, several noblemen accepted the true faith. Onunder of Reykjadar, Heleni of Sarbair, and Thorvardur of Ass in Hjaltadar. His brothers Arngeir and Thordur also turned to Christ, though Arngeir plotted violence. They refused to pay temple tithes. Pagans became enraged and conspired against them. A berserk named Klaufi came to burn Thorvaldur's church. When he and his men reached it, they saw fire within, but it was divine light, and they fled. Later, Arngeir also tried to burn it. He broke open the door, lit a fire, and lay down to blow the coals. Then an arrow struck beside his head. Another pinned his cloak to the floor. He cried, "This one came too close. I won't wait for a third." Thus, God protected his church. The building stood 16 years before Christianity was made law in Iceland. Chapter 6 continued. The slander and final division. Some malicious pagans composed a vile verse slandering the bishop and Thorvaldur. 9 children has the bishop borne, all of them fathered by Thorvaldur. Thorvaldur, in righteous anger, killed the 2 skalds who had composed the verse. But Bishop Friedrich bore all insults with the utmost humility. Afterward, Thorvaldur came to the bishop to confess what he had done. The bishop was reading a book when 2 drops of blood fell upon the page, an ominous sign which he at once understood. When Thorvaldur entered, the bishop said, "Either you have committed a killing, or it is in your heart to do so." Thorvaldur confessed the slaying. The bishop asked, "Why did you act so?" Thorvaldur answered, "I could not bear that they called us cowards." The bishop replied, "It was a small thing for them to lie and say you had fathered children. You have made their words worse. I could well bear your children, if you had any. A Christian should never avenge himself, no matter how he is mocked, but should endure slander and wrongs for the sake of God." Chapter 7. The Baptism of Ingimundur. Though they endured many trials, they did not stop preaching. They came to Laxardal and stayed for a time with Atli the Strong, Thorvaldur's uncle. Atli and his household were baptized, along with many others. Then, by the grace of God, the words of the bishop reached the ears of a small child named Ingimundur, 5 winters old, son of Hafr in Goddalr. He was being fostered at Reykjastrand. One day, he asked his foster shepherd to secretly take him to Eilifsfjall to see the bishop. Thus, they crossed Kartanskja and reached Atli's farm. Ingimundur begged to be baptized. Atli brought him to the bishop and said, "This child is the son of a noble heathen man. He seeks baptism without his father's or foster's knowledge. Consider what should be done, for they will not be pleased." The bishop smiled and said, "A holy gift must not be denied to a young child, especially when he understands it better than his elders." And so Ingimundur was baptized. Before he left, the bishop instructed him carefully on what he must keep in his Christian life. Chapter 8. Mani hin Kristni. It is said that Bishop Friedrich baptized a man named Mani. Because he kept the faith with great virtue and good conduct, he was called Mani the Christian. He lived at Holt on Kogamairar, where he built a church. There, he served God day and night with prayers and almsgiving. He had a fishing station at a river called Manifos, named after him. During a great famine, he had nothing to feed the hungry. He went to the river and caught many fish in the pool under the waterfall. He gave all this to the church. According to monk Gunnlaugur, the fishing rights of that spot have remained ever since. Near the church, one still sees a fenced field called Managerdi, where Mani worked to gather hay for a single cow he raised, preferring honest labor over contact with the pagan world, which hated him. Chapter 9. Final persecutions and the separation. Though many persecutions came upon them, Bishop Friedrich and Thorvaldur went to the spring assembly at Hegrons. But as they neared the site, a mob of pagans rose up and attacked with shouting and stones, rattling their weapons and crying out for the gods to destroy their enemies. The bishop said, Now comes to pass what once came in a dream to my mother, that she found wolf hairs in my head. For now we are driven like savage wolves with cries and blows. They returned to Lake Yamat and stayed there the summer. That same summer, after the Altingi, a band of 200 pagan men came to burn the bishop and his household. But as they approached the farm, they dismounted to rest. Then flocks of terrible birds flew over them. Their horses panicked, threw their riders, and fled. Some men broke bones, others stabbed themselves on weapons. They were scattered and had to return home humiliated. So God protected his servants, and they remained unharmed. The next summer, Bishop Friedrich and Thorvald sailed abroad. They stayed in Norway for a time. Then Hayden of Svalbard, their old enemy, arrived. He went ashore to cut timber. Thorvald saw him and took his servant to the woods where he had Hayden killed. When Thorvald returned and told the bishop, Friedrich said, "For this slaying, we must now part. You are slow to leave the ways of violence." Friedrich departed to Saxony, where he reposed in peace, receiving eternal rest for his holy labors. Chapter 10. The Journey to the East and Death in Holiness. Thorvald lived many more years. But knowing his nature, brave, strong, and zealous, he feared that if he returned to Iceland he might fail to endure suffering with patience. So he resolved never to return. Instead, he journeyed abroad, to Jerusalem, and then through Greece, finally reaching Miklagardr, Constantinople. The emperor himself received him with honor and gave him great gifts. His fame spread everywhere. Bishops, abbots, and even the emperor honored him as a pillar of the faith and a glorious confessor of Christ. The emperor appointed him a representative over all the kings of Rus and the lands of Gardariki. Thorvald founded a monastery near the church of St. John the Baptist. It became known as Thorvald's Cloister. There he ended his life in purity and holiness, and was buried under the high cliffs of Drafn. At the time Bishop Friedrich and Thorvald first came to Iceland, it was 901 years after the Nativity of Christ, and 196 years after the settlement of Iceland. 3 years later, Thorvald Spakbodvarsson built a church at Ass. Addition from Flateyjarbók. It is said that after Thorvald and the bishop parted ways, Thorvald journeyed far and wide. At the time Emperor Otto was converting Denmark, King Olafur Tryggvason went eastward with him, helping to Christianize the people. On that journey, Olafur met Thorvald Kodransson. Though they had never met before, they had each heard much of the other's wisdom and fame. They greeted one another warmly. Olafur asked, "Are you Thorvald, the far traveler?" Thorvald replied, "I have not yet traveled far." Olafur said, "You are a good and noble man. What faith do you hold?" Thorvald replied, "Gladly will I tell you. I hold the faith of the Christians." Olafur said, "It seems you serve your Lord well and awaken the hearts of many. I would gladly hear the wonders of your God, tales of distant lands and peoples, and the deeds you have done." Thorvald replied, "Since you ask sincerely, I will tell you what I have seen and heard, if you in turn will answer what I ask." Olafur agreed. Thorvald told him many wonders, and all who listened were delighted. When he spoke of Iceland and their missionary work there, Olafur asked many questions. Who had converted? Who had resisted? When Olafur heard of the efforts and the great suffering endured for Christ's sake, he said, "It seems the Icelanders are hardy and bold. It will be hard to convert them, but I believe it will happen. And once they believe, they will hold the faith firmly." Thorvald said, "I have heard that you will become king in Norway, and I believe God will give you success in bringing many peoples in the north to the true faith." They questioned each other wisely for a long time and parted with deep friendship. Thorvald then journeyed again to Miklagardr, received great honor from the emperor, and founded a monastery with his wealth. There he ended his life with pure and exalted conduct. The account of Thorvald Vidforli, Thorvald the Far Traveler, in Torfaeus's Latin histories. Among the earliest efforts to introduce the Christian faith into Iceland, there was a certain noble and zealous man by the name of Thorvaldus, the son of Kodransson. He was sent together with Bishop Friedrichur, to preach Christ's name among the Icelanders before the coming of King Olaf Tryggvason. Thorvald was not ordained to the episcopate, yet showed such fervor that he stood as a pillar of that same apostolic labor. Arriving in Iceland with Bishop Friedrich, he endured much persecution and mockery at the hands of the pagans, who refused the doctrine of Christ. It is said that they offered silver to poets to compose libelous verses against them, accusing Bishop Frederick of fathering many children with the women of Iceland, of which Thorvald was named the father of them all. In righteous indignation, Thorvald slew those who had slandered the church, though the bishop himself bore the offense with humility. Later, Thorvald departed Iceland and never returned, fearing lest his zeal should again lead to acts that could mar the gospel. Instead, he set out for foreign lands, traveling eastward until he reached Jerusalem, and Byzantium, Miklagardar. There, he was received by the emperor with honor, and his fame for piety and steadfastness preceded him. By divine grace and ecclesiastical commendation, he was appointed by the emperor as a kind of overseer or spiritual deputy for the lands of the Rus, Russia, particularly in Gardariki. He founded there, near the Church of St. John the Baptist, a monastery, which he endowed with property and where he spent the remainder of his life. This monastery, known thereafter as Thorvald's Kloster, Thorvald's Monastery, lies beneath a tall cliff named Drofn. There he reposed in peace and was venerated for his faith. Furthermore, it is recorded that while Olaf Tryggvason was journeying eastward with Emperor Otto to convert the Danes and Slavs, he met Thorvald in person. Though they had never met before, each had heard of the other, and their meeting was one of great warmth. Olaf called him Thorvald the Far Traveler, to which Thorvald modestly replied, "I have not yet traveled far enough." Olaf asked him of his faith and mission, and Thorvald recounted with clarity the miracles of Christ, the hardships endured in Iceland, and the lands he had visited. The two men exchanged wise counsel, and Thorvald predicted that Olaf would one day rule Norway and would bring many northern peoples, including the Icelanders, to the Christian faith. After this, they parted with affection and mutual respect. The life of St. Thorvald, the Far Traveler, T. 11th C. Confessor and missionary to Gardariki and Polotsk, also known as Thorvaldur Kodransson, Tur Timotheus. Tur, or Timotheus, by nation an Icelander, a most Christian man, having left his homeland, lived in the regions beyond the Moskva River near Polotsk, embracing the monastic life. Historia Rerum Norvegicarum, Volume 4. Thorvald Kodransson, known in the East as Tur, or by his monastic name Timotheus, was an Icelander of noble ancestry who left his native land after much struggle for the Christian faith. As recorded in various sagas and confirmed by Thorvaldur Torfason, after departing from Iceland and traveling to Norway, he eventually went abroad again, this time far to the east. There, he came to Gardariki, Old Norse for Rus, and settled in the area of Polotsk beyond the river Moskva. Having taken up the monastic life, he lived in pious solitude, dedicating himself to asceticism and to missionary work among the pagan Slavs. He was honored greatly by the emperor and received a mandate to spread the Christian faith among the Ruthenians. According to Torfason, Thorvald received high honors from the emperor of the Greeks, Byzantium, and was given a mandate as apostolic legate, charged with overseeing the conversion of the peoples of Rus and Gardariki. This aligns with the tradition that he was ordained or blessed for episcopal or missionary work, a role he embraced with boldness and zeal. He was sent by the emperor of the Greeks to the Rus and Gardariki as a sort of apostolic legate. In the course of his mission, he founded a monastery beneath the cliffs of Drofn, dedicating it to St. John the Baptist, whom he especially venerated. This monastery came to be known as Thorvald's Monastery, Claustrum Thorvaldi, a place marked by discipline, spiritual instruction, and prayer. He founded a monastery beneath the cliff Drofn in honor of St. John the Baptist, which afterward was called Thorvald's Monastery. Thorvald lived the remainder of his days in this monastic house, far from his homeland, but not far from the kingdom of heaven. In his latter years he was revered throughout the region, remembered both by laymen and clergy as a pillar of the Orthodox faith. His name, whether spoken as Thorvaldur, Tur, or Timotheus, was remembered with honor among the converts and among those of the Eastern Church who saw in him a living witness of the gospel. That summer, Brander traveled to Gardariki and came to the city called Polotsk. There he asked about the burial place of the man called Timotheus, who had brought Christianity to those regions. The people said he was most holy and that he was buried by the Church of St. John in the city. He was called a holy man there, and many people visited his grave with prayer and reverence. Thorvaldur in Vidforli and Bishop Friedrecher, Missionary Efforts and Saga Accounts. Thorvaldur Kodransson, known as Thorvaldur in Vidforli, Old Norse for the far traveled, was an Icelandic skald who became one of the first Christian missionaries in Iceland in the late 10th century. He was converted and baptized abroad by a Saxon cleric, Bishop Friedrich, and in 981, Thorvaldur returned to Iceland in Bishop Friedrich's company to evangelize the island. Together, they built what is said to be the first Christian church in Iceland and preached especially in the northern regions. Their mission met with hostility from pagan locals. At one point, Thorvald, provoked by ridicule, killed 2 men who had mocked the faith, which created a scandal. As a result of this violent incident, the 2 missionaries were forced to leave Iceland by 986. After departing Iceland, Bishop Friedrich's activities are not well documented. Icelandingabok, an early chronicle, only briefly notes Friedrich's arrival with no further details. It is presumed Friedrich returned to mainland Europe. Thorvald, however, embarked on further travels across the Christian world. The Icelandic Kristni saga and Thorvald's Thatr Vidforla recount that Thorvald went on pilgrimage to Jerusalem and then visited Constantinople around 985. In Constantinople, he allegedly received a commission, a charter of authority, from the Eastern Roman Emperor Basil II to serve as an ambassador missionary to the Rus lands in Eastern Europe. By 986, Thorvald traveled via Kiev into the Principality of Polotsk, in present-day Belarus. There, according to these accounts, he built a church dedicated to St. John the Baptist and established a small monastic community. The sagas even mention that Thorvald encountered the famous Viking prince Olafur Tryggvason in Polotsk during this time. Thorvald remained in Polotsk for the rest of his life. It is recorded that he died in Polotsk sometime after the year 1002. Monument stone in Iceland commemorating Bishop Friedrich and Thorvald in Vidforli, marking their 981 mission to Christianize Iceland. Friedrich, a German bishop, and Thorvald are credited in saga tradition as the first to preach Christianity on Icelandic soil. Saga hagiography versus official sainthood status 1. In the saga literature, Bishop Friedrich is depicted as a holy and saintly figure. Kristni saga describes Friedrich as Sunheiliger, truly holy, and Thorvald's Thatr adds that he ended his life med heiligtum, heilig-like, with sublime holiness, underscoring his virtuous reputation. The sagas attribute miracles to him as well. For example, Friedrich is said to have driven an evil spirit out of a pagan altar stone, thus converting Thorvald's own father to Christianity. In these stories, Friedrich appears as a model missionary, bishop pious, miracle-working, and patient. Thorvald, by contrast, is portrayed as a more turbulent hero who mixes missionary zeal with Viking bravado. He preaches and builds churches, yet also engages in bold exploits, including the aforementioned killings. Notwithstanding his laws, the narrative shows Thorvald eventually dedicating himself fully to Christ, and his successful journey to the Holy Land in Polotsk is cast in a providential light. These saga narratives are semi-hagiographic. They adopt the tropes of saints' lives, but they were written long after the fact and are considered historically unreliable in many details. Indeed, later Iceland had to admit that it had no official conversion age saints from the 10th century. Figures like Friedrich and Thorvald lived in the era of Iceland's conversion, but were never formally canonized by the medieval church. Crucially, neither Friedrich nor Thorvald appears as an officially recognized saint on the universal calendars of the Orthodox or Roman Catholic churches. There is no record of an authorized canonization or a general feast day for either man. Bishop Friedrich, despite his saintly portrayal in Icelandic tradition, does not figure in Orthodox hagiographic lists. After his Iceland mission, he largely disappears from the historical record. Thorvald in Vidforli likewise was not canonized by Rome or Constantinople. However, as we shall see, Thorvald's local veneration in the place of his death, Polotsk, gave him a kind of informal sainthood within that region, even if it was never confirmed by the wider church. Thorvald's veneration in Polotsk and identification as Timofey of Polotsk. Medieval hints suggest that Thorvald was revered as a holy man in Polotsk after his death. The Kristni saga, in a section attributed to the Skald Brandr in Ferdimadur, that is, Brand the Wanderer, recounts that Thorvald was buried I Hafjali Upai Drafni at Johanniskirkju. In plain language, this means he was laid to rest on a high hill called Drafn, up above John's church. The saga verse then notes that Thorvald was regarded as a saint by the local people. In other words, later visitors to Polotsk found that Thorvald's grave near the church of St. John the Baptist was a site of veneration. This implies a local cultus that townsfolk honored his memory, perhaps as a righteous monk or missionary, who had brought them the Christian faith. Supporting this, historical data show that a St. John's monastery existed in Polotsk in later centuries. A 14th century chronicle records a monastery of St. John the Baptist, on the island, opposite Polotsk's upper castle, believed to be on the same site as the one founded by Thorvald. This continuity suggests Thorvald's mission left a lasting imprint on Polotsk's Christian community, and his burial place continued to be revered. Modern scholars have attempted to connect Thorvald's Polotsk legacy with references to an obscure local saint. Notably, Russian church historian Ov Loseva has hypothesized that Thorvald in Vidtvorli was remembered in the Polotsk region as Saint Timofey of Polotsk, Saint Timothy. In her research on medieval Rus monologies, church calendars, Loseva found indications of a locally venerated saint in Polotsk called Timofey, or possibly a figure nicknamed Tur Polotsky. She proposes that this was in fact Thorvald, who, after his baptism tonsure, may have been known by the Christian name Timothy. Timofey. It was not uncommon for missionaries or converts of that era to adopt a new saint's name. If Thorvald took monastic vows in his final years, he might have received a name like Timotheos, in honor of the biblical Saint Timothy. According to Loseva, Thorvald Timofey likely enjoyed local canonization or veneration within the Polotsk eparchy in the generations after his death. In other words, the Orthodox community of Polotsk may have esteemed him as a regional saint, even if this was never proclaimed throughout the broader church. It must be emphasized that Saint Timofey of Polotsk is not a well-documented or universally recognized saint in our present records. There is no surviving medieval life of Saint Timofey, and no known feast day observed in later Orthodox calendars for him. The evidence of his veneration comes mainly from the Icelandic accounts and fragmentary mentions in local history. The identification of Timofey with Thorvald is a scholarly hypothesis based on coinciding details, not a certainty. Still, the hypothesis is plausible. Thorvald's story aligns with the context in which a first Christian missionary of Polotsk would be honored. Local memory in Belarus even calls Thorvald the forgotten first saint of White Russia, Belarus, highlighting that he planted the seeds of Christianity in Polotsk before officialdom took hold. In any case, Thorvald's sainthood, if we may call it that, was limited to regional veneration. He was never formally canonized by either Rome or Constantinople, but within Polotsk's ecclesiastical folk memory, he was revered as a holy man who brought the light of the gospel. Historical context: Polotsk in the late 10th century. To understand the significance of Thorvald's Saint Timofey's mission, it is important to grasp the state of Polotsk around the year 986-1000. Polotsk was a prominent town in the land of the Krivich Slavs and a strategic trading hub on the Dvina River. In 980, just a few years before Thorvald's arrival, Polotsk had been violently drawn into the emerging Kievan Rus state. Prince Vladimir of Kiev attacked Polotsk, killed its ruler Prince Rogvolod of Orangian Ragnvald, and took Rogvolod's daughter Rogneda by force. Vladimir's conquest effectively exterminated Polotsk's native dynasty, bringing the territory under Kiev's sway. In 988, Vladimir the Great embraced Eastern Christianity, baptism in Kiev, and married Byzantine Princess Anna. As part of this transformation, he dismissed his earlier pagan wives, including Rogneda. Rogneda entered monastic life, taking the name Anastasia, and Vladimir sent her and their young son Izyaslav back to Polotsk to rule as Christian sovereigns. Thus, from c. 990 onward, Polotsk was governed by Vladimir's son, establishing the local branch of the Rurikid dynasty. This also marked the beginning of Polotsk's Christianization. From this time, the lands of the principality became Christian, Eastern Orthodox. By 992, a full diocesan see, Orthodox bishopric of Polotsk, had been founded, the oldest in the Belarusian region as part of the metropolitan province of Kiev. The Polotsk diocese's creation, traditionally dated 992, indicates that a stable church hierarchy was being organized there, within a few years of Rus conversion. Thorvald's mission to Polotsk in 986 took place on the eve of these developments. When he arrived, Polotsk was likely still largely pagan or newly baptized in small numbers. Vladimir's mass baptism of Kiev had not yet extended fully to distant Polotsk, which lay over 500 kilometers away, and the formal Christian structures were just being put in place. In fact, Thorvald can be seen as a precursor to, or participant in, Polotsk's initial conversion. His building of the John the Baptist Chapel and Monastery in 986 fits perfectly in the time frame when Polotsk was first encountering organized Christianity. He arrived roughly 2 years before Polotsk's official diocesan establishment meaning he was literally one of the first Christian missionaries on the ground in that area. Polotsk's later illustrious saints, for example, Saint Or Euphrosina of Polotsk in the 12th century, would flourish in an already Christian society. But Thorvald came at a time when Christianity was just taking root. This historical context explains why Thorvald could be remembered as Polotsk's proto-saint. His evangelical work complemented Prince Isyaslav's efforts in planting the new faith among the Polotsk people. In summary, neither Thorvald in Vidforli nor Bishop Friedricher are listed as canonized saints in the Sazon official rolls of the Orthodox Church. They lived in the pre-schism era, before 1054, so had they been widely venerated, their cults might have been shared by East and West, but in reality, their veneration was limited and localized. Bishop Friedricher remains a saintly figure in legend, but no more. Thorvald, on the other hand, left a more concrete legacy in Eastern Christendom. The church he founded in Polotsk and the lore of his burial place gave rise to a local saintly cult, leading later generations to regard him as an apostle of their land. This local veneration survived in memory to the point that historians today can speak of Saint Timofey of Polotsk, a figure likely inspired by Thorvald's life. Though not officially glorified by the broader Orthodox Church, Thorvald's apostolic deeds in Iceland and Belarus earned him an honored place in the regional Christian history of the North. His story straddles the line between history and hagiography, illustrating how the first torchbearers of the faith in a new land could be acclaimed as saints by those whom they illumined, even if the institutional church never formally pronounced them so. Sources: Medieval Icelandic sagas, Kristini Saga and Thorvald's Thatervid Forla, and Olaf's Saga Tryggvasonar and Mesta, etc. As cited in these recount Thorvald and Friedricher's mission in Iceland and Thorvald's later travels, albeit with legendary embellishments. Islendingabok, 12th C, chronicled by Ari Thorgilsson, notes Friedricher's 981 mission briefly. Modern historical analyses and translations. For example, Sian Gronlie, 2017, on Saga Hagiography. Russian and Belarusian historical research on Polotsk. For example, Ova Loseva's study of Russian Monologies, 163 CC, hypothesizing Thorvald's identification with Saint Timofey. Commentary by Yevgeny Papakul on Thorvald's burial in Polotsk. Chronicles of Kievan Rus, the primary chronicle for Polotsk events, Rogneda and Isyaslav, as summarized in modern works. Belarusian Orthodox Church Information, Foundation of Polotsk Eparchy in 992. Local Belarusian articles in translation: Thorvald, Sviatoy Dlia Usik, Thorvald, a saint for everyone, and related pieces highlighting Thorvald's role in early Belarusian Christianity. These reflect contemporary interest in Thorvald or Timofey as a unifying figure honored by various Christian denominations. Throughout, the evidence indicates that Thorvald in Vidforli and Friedricher are not counted among the universally recognized saints of the Orthodox Church. Yet Thorvald's regional cult in Polotsk, as Saint Timofey, provides a fascinating case of a pre-schism missionary who, while never officially canonized, attained an almost saintly remembrance in the locale he evangelized. This underscores the rich tapestry of early missionary history, where legend and local piety could elevate pioneer evangelists to the status of patronal saints in the eyes of the community, if not on the rolls of the ecumenical councils.